in a few minutes. So thank you very much for logging on, and we're very pleased to welcome you to the Project Fair webinar. My name is Samantha Wakefield, or Sam. I'm the People Management Lead at the CHS Alliance. I'm joined by Lauren, who is based in London with the CHS Alliance, and Ishbel, who will be leading the discussion today. I think you're all on mute, but if you could keep yourself on mute during the presentation, that would help a lot, because there's often a lot of background noise going on from the officers. If you want to raise a question or say something or add an example from your own organisation, please just indicate in the chat or turn yourself off on mute and say whatever you would like to contribute. But if we use the chat box, then that should work well, and that's what we've done in other webinars. So today we just thought that we would organise a webinar for, it won't be too long, but about 45 minutes, and we would present some of the research that the Project Fair research team have conducted, mainly through 2016 and finishing the research this year. This has been published, and hopefully you've seen the report online, and it does also include some case studies that the research team have written up so that organisations can look at the different approaches to fair reward. You may well also know that there was a workshop in London in April, and the reason why we organised this webinar, and we'll be organising another webinar for those the west side of the world, is because the workshop was in London. We could only hold it in London, and we acknowledged that a lot of people couldn't participate in that workshop. So the webinar is just just to let you know what happened at the workshop, a bit more about the research, and to start to engage organisations in the discussion about the disparity between international and national staff salaries. You will get a chance to ask any questions at the end, but if you feel the need to ask a question during the presentation, then please just say. So I think this just leaves me to introduce Ishbel to you. Ishbel has been the research lead on Project Fair. Project Fair has been through a project team of the University of Edinburgh, CHS Alliance, Massey University in New Zealand, and Birchis Group. So Ishbel is, if I get this right, an early career fellow in International Human Resources Management from the University of Edinburgh's Business School, and as I said, she has been the lead on the research team. So Ishbel, I'll hand over to you if you're ready to start, if that's okay.
Thank you very much, Sam. Hello everybody, and welcome to the webinar. I'm just going to try and share my screen with you so that you can all see the slides, hopefully. Is that working, Sam? Please let me know if it's not. Hopefully you can just see the slides there.
Good. Yeah, it looks good. Thanks.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. So welcome. Yes, welcome to the webinar. Thank you very much for joining us. It's great that we're able to offer these opportunities for other people around the world to hear about the research that we've been doing. You know, we're very keen to continue the conversation about fair pay and to work with other organisations who are interested in this topic as well. So we hope that you will be. As Sam mentioned, I work at the University of Edinburgh in the area of international human resource management, and my special area of research really is on the HR policies and practices of international NGOs. And I've been looking at this issue of reward in the international NGO sector for about the last 10 years at least. So I'll talk a little bit about some of the research that's led up to this project, but mostly I'll be focusing on this particular project today. So before I go into anything in too much detail, I wanted to just introduce the project team, as Sam has already done. So just myself and Yakov, who've been here at the University of Edinburgh. There's Stuart Carr, who's at Massey University in New Zealand, Sam at CHS Alliance, and the whole team really at CHS Alliance have been supporting this project, and Birchis Group. We've been working with Curtis Grind there as well. So an overview of today's webinar. I wanted to start by giving some background to the project and to the research that the project's based upon. And then I'm just going to talk about the results of this particular project. So talking about what organisations are doing in terms of pay, the changes that have been made, why people are changing, why they're not changing, key learnings that they've had from the change process, barriers to change that have come through. And then looking ahead, what we found in the research was that there was a strong strategic component to these kinds of changes. So I'm going to talk about those a little bit as well. So starting with some of the background, I always like to begin with a definition of what we're actually talking about here. And in this context, we're talking about dual salaries, which is in low-income countries paying skilled host country national employees and expatriate counterparts on different pay and benefit scales. This is what most international, multinationals, many international NGOs are doing in order to recruit international individuals into their organisations. And our research kind of suggests that there is a potential barrier in doing this to a number of the Sustainable Development Goals. So there's really this macro idea that what organisations or NGOs are doing can be contributing or not to the Sustainable Development Goals. And I just particularly point you there to the SDG 8, which talks about equal pay for work of equal value. There are obviously also links with the localization agenda and just this real push to move towards using local capacity where possible. So a little bit about the research itself. So much of the research around the way that pay is distributed within organisations talks about equity theory. This theory is about perceived fairness of how much you earn, of what your rewards are, based on the ratio of how much you input into your role. So for example, if I'm earning 2 times more than another individual, I would find that fair if I'm actually inputting twice as much effort. There are obviously, some issues around kind of contextual things like when we're moving people internationally, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But in general, the theory is people feel that things are unfair when that ratio of what they put in is not equivalent to what they put out compared to someone else. There were a few experimental studies that looked at this early on, and I'm not going to go into details of that, but I'm happy to share it if you want to get in touch. Basically, this particular study here by Carr et al., they manipulated pay amongst students for doing a similar task. And they found that when people were paid more or less, when they were aware of that, that their engagement in the task actually decreased. So both those who were paid more and less. And so that kind of starts to point to some negative impacts of inequity and inequitable pay, potentially within work contexts. So building on that, we ran a 3-year large-scale research project called Project Add Up. That was undertaken in 6 countries, 202 organisations, and we had 1,290 participants altogether. And what we looked at was, firstly, just what are the pay ratios? What are people earning? And we found a general ratio of 4 to 1. So expatriate staff earning 4 times what the local colleagues were earning. And we controlled as much as we could for education and experience as well. So it was similarly qualified and educated individuals who were on international versus local contracts. And there was wide variability in that pay ratio. So one of our country sites was the Solomon Islands, and the ratio there was 10 to 1. So expatriates earning 10 times what the locals were earning. And in China, it was just 2 to 1. We found that some inequity was actually acceptable. So we did ask people if they felt that some amount was okay. And they said somewhere between 2 and 3 times the local salary was acceptable to them for an expatriate to earn, in recognition of the hardship of moving to a different context and all of those other issues. We also asked people kind of motivational questions about pay and how it affected them, and specifically how this pay gap affected them. And what we found was that people reported feelings of injustice, demotivation, there were reduced levels of learning, and feelings of wanting to turn over. And this was particularly so amongst the host country national staff, the local staff. So we felt potentially this might be leading to an impeding of capacity building of our local colleagues. Excuse me. We also found quite interestingly that organisation was really important. So we controlled for country, for sector, and for organisation within our analyses. And what we found was that organisation had the strongest impact on whether or not someone felt pay was fair or not, and how they felt demotivated about it. So it suggests to us that a really important point of intervention is the organisation themselves, more than the culture, more than the sector. So this research, we looked at business, government, education, and the aid sector as well, and we didn't find any major differences across those different sectors. Organisation was the key. A surprising finding was we asked people just this basic question: is your pay sufficient to meet your everyday needs? So 81% of the expatriate staff said yes, it was fine, but 80% of the local respondents said no, it wasn't sufficient to meet their everyday needs. So we need to look into that a little bit more to see whether or not, as a sector, we're paying a living wage for our local employees. We took all of these findings back to the countries themselves. There's 6 countries. So that was India, China, Malawi, Uganda, the Solomon Islands, and Papua New Guinea. We took all of the findings back to these in-country workshops, and we told them about it and asked them basically to help us to understand what it all meant. Basically what they came back with was, we're not looking for equality, we're looking for transparency and openness and fairness in the way that pay is distributed within the organisations. So building on Project Add Up, we ran a workshop in London in collaboration with People in Aid and Birch's group. And this was basically to work with rewards and HR managers to tell them about what the research had shown. And essentially the feedback we got, I mean, some of you on the webinar may have been there, essentially what we got was people saying, this makes sense. Yes, you know, this kind of chimes with what our employees are telling us. But what do we do about it? And at that point, we thought we don't actually know. So we thought we'd better go out and ask the organisations themselves. And so that's what we did, and that's what this project is all about. So now, really, I'm going to just present the results of the project fair itself. I'm just seeing that in the chat box, some people aren't seeing the slides moving on. They should be seeing them moved on. So I'll just.
I think it was fine. I think because you were going through quite a few points on the background slide, I think Veronique was still on the background slide. But everyone should be able to see Project Fair aims now. Is that okay? Okay.
Yes, that's where we should be.
Yeah.
Great.
We're okay.
Thanks.
Yeah. Great. Thanks, Veronique.
Thank you. Right, so that was the kind of the background to the research, and now talking about Project Fair itself. So as I said, this project really aimed to build on that existing body of psychological research into the impact on motivation, on justice of our employees. And we wanted to talk to organisations about what they're doing, what's working, what's not working, and what are the kinds of different remuneration systems that are being used. And then find a way to build an evidence base to translate what is being done into a way that it can be used by others to learn and to make decisions based on evidence for their own organisations. And part of that was also to develop organisational case studies and an online resource which is there on the website. And hopefully you've had a chance to look at that already. So we undertook 18 interviews with HR and reward managers from 13 different international NGOs. As you can see here on the slide, we had a wide range of size, programmatic focus, organisational structure. And of these organisations, 7 were headquartered in the UK, 2 in Europe and Scandinavia, and 3 in Africa, and 1 in Asia. So there was some spread there. We undertook semi-structured interviews. And I'm happy to provide more detail on this as well if anyone's interested. But basically what we just wanted to know was, what are you doing? Why are you doing this? Has it worked? Has it not worked? So have you tried things in some offices that aren't working? Why did you want to change your reward system or not change your reward system? So we did talk to organisations who both have changed and haven't changed. And for us as researchers, we also were really interested in the ways of evaluating whether or not the changes are being effective. So how do you know it works? And that includes looking at what HR metrics are being gathered and the impact that reward might be having on those metrics. We asked a little bit about stakeholder perspectives on reward, and then basic demographic and structural questions about the organisation. In terms of our analysis, we just really did basic thematic analysis, and allowing the themes to come directly from the data rather than imposing a structure or an idea of what we thought we would find. So it really all organically emerged from the data. And now we'll just go straight into what we found. So this is a busy slide, but basically what it's saying is that of our 13 organisations, 3 were already have a single salary system, and they don't look the same. So everybody's going about it in a slightly different way. For example, using a nationally benchmarked benefit and a relocation allowance, but everybody having a single salary scale. The various different ways of having the single salary systems, but they all have single systems with some variation in the way the benefits are allocated. 5 organisations that we spoke to are still using the dual salary system. So national employees are on a local package, a national country package, and then there's this international package as well for international employees. And then 5 organisations are implementing what we've called a hybrid system. So again, these look different according to the organisation. So this might be using a local policy for the lower grades, but a global policy for higher grades, regardless of what your nationality is, regardless of whether you were recruited internationally or not. Matching executive positions, but still retaining that dual system. The third one there is headquarter and national country scales and benefits. So rather than having a national and a global package, it's a headquarter and a national package. Having everyone on a HQ package, that organisation was particularly was a bit unique because it was a networked organisation, so there wasn't a huge amount of mobility in that organisation. And then the final one there is a kind of a technical versus non-technical subscale that was needed in a particularly specialist kind of organisation. And we've got 6 case studies on the website, which are free to download and print and use it however you wish. And that those 6 organisations very kindly shared the details of what they're doing, challenges that they've faced, any lessons they've kind of learned. So feel free to go in and download those, and you can get in touch with me or with the organisation directly if you're interested in more information. So the project results really suggested that many organisations are taking an incremental approach to change. The first steps in this change process seem to be developing a consistent and transparent system. So this was using job evaluation and benchmarking to come up with a structure underpinning the reward system in the organisation. The next step was kind of an implementation of a nationalisation policy. So I'm sure you'll all be aware or familiar with that kind of concept, this localisation idea, hiring nationally where skills are available rather than internationally. At the same time, at the second stage, we're seeing a reduction in the benefits and allowances that are being paid to international staff. There was also a focus at this point around the total reward package that's being offered. And I'm going to come back to that in a bit more detail later when I talk about the strategic approaches that are needed, because it's quite an important point as well. Finally, the third stage was when organisations started to implement a single system, a single salary structure, where all staff are paid a living wage. Some organisations using a mix of kind of global data, global benchmarking data at the top of their scale, but it was a single scale that any employee could move on regardless of their nationality. And often that includes local benefits, but with a relocation allowance. So anyone who's moving internationally is provided some allowance to facilitate that. it's also quite a lot tied into the mobility policy of the organisation here. And again, I'm going to come back to this as an important part of the organisational strategy. So I'll go into that in a little bit more detail. Now, we asked about how the system is evaluated, and in terms of stakeholder feedback, there wasn't a great deal of feedback from stakeholders other than staff. Some organisations did mention donors, so I've put a quote there about donors expressing concern about the high pay of the international posts. There was a mix, so some staff said that they felt that it wasn't fair. Others said that they were concerned that competitiveness of the organisation might be reduced if packages are changed. So there's a need to balance competitiveness with fairness, but also to include your employees, your current employees, in the conversation about why you're making changes, if you are making changes, so that they don't feel kind of worried or stressed about the impact that that might have on the organisation. We also looked at HR metrics. So we asked people what kind of metrics they're measuring. And generally, these weren't well measured formally, particularly in the country offices. Sometimes they were well measured in the headquarters, but not so much in the country offices. And these are metrics like time to recruit, turnover and retention, engagement and satisfaction. Some said, yeah, we do exit interviews, but maybe probably only with our expats. Same with engagement surveys. So I think we can do a little bit better at building in some evaluation of these systems so that we can really follow what's going on when we make changes to our reward systems. Even just having some real basic metrics can be really useful for helping to make evidence-based decisions. And in fact, one quote there said that actually it's the informal feedback that's really important. So I think the perceptions of the system being unfair can come maybe not so much from the staff survey, but from conversations and from feedback from regional HR managers and from particular emails from particular individuals. So it's perhaps not only about implementing formal systems, but having some informal way of capturing the mood of your organisation as well. So I asked people why they were thinking about changing their system, why they are changing their system, why they have changed their system. Now, these reasons are not mutually exclusive. The main point was around fairness. So obviously the first 2 points there, fairness and consistency and transparency, they're quite well linked. I've got a quote there, we want to ensure that we have a more consistent and unified approach to reward. The packages should be as similar as possible, and if there are differences, we want to be able to explain why they are there. So a third reason for making the changes was just simply around cost. It's just becoming really expensive to pay these huge packages to expatriate and internationally recruited employees. And it's perhaps not so needed anymore either if you're able to still recruit people on a smaller package than that. And the fourth point there was around values, and that's values of the organisation and also of the sector more broadly. And that quote at the bottom of the slide links with that point. So it says, we just didn't want to have that separate elite class of staff. It's really all about our values and our original founders' ethos. We don't think that we should treat people differently. We don't think that we can go into a country and talk about equality and equity, yet within our own organisation we're not treating people the same. And I think this is oftentimes a point of difference between our sector and kind of the corporate business sector, that we really are about capacity building and equity. And so perhaps some of those systems that work in the corporate sector may not work so well within our own sector. And then the final point there was just really availability of skilled local talent. And this came up a few times. People were saying, well, we don't actually need to recruit internationally, or maybe we do need one or two international people, but we've got really skilled local individuals available, and we want to make sure that we nurture them and find a way to support them and to retain them in the organisation. So what kind of barriers to change came through? So the main one was really this fear of the difficulty of recruiting. And by and large, the feedback from those who participated were that this is really a fear. It wasn't actually necessarily played out in reality. Related to this was also this wanting to remain competitive, both within the sector and also meeting the expectations of potential employees. You want to offer a competitive package to individuals, which makes complete sense. And we'll come back later to this idea of trying to have a sector-wide approach or kind of commitment to the way that we're making changes. The third barrier to making change was just thinking about being consistent across different economic situations. So, and then the idea of whether we actually need to be consistent. So do we need consistency in places like Kenya versus places like the Ivory Coast, for example? Are there some contexts where single salary systems may not work, say where skills aren't available? And also this links a lot into the mobility philosophy that you've got in your organization, whether you want to completely localize, whether you still need to have a kind of a globalized cadre of workers moving around. And I'll talk about that in a moment. And then finally, another barrier was the ability to recruit within high risk and emergency locations, where it's already a challenge to recruit individuals. So I think what we're trying to say in this project is when you don't need to be equitable everywhere, or you don't need to be equal everywhere. It's about considering every context and what you need to do in those particular contexts. So lessons learned, these came directly from the organisations themselves. So as with any change process, really, communication with the staff is the most important process. And a couple of people even talked about this as a type of PR, the importance of really engaging with your current employees about it. Strategic thinking is really crucial. So you need to think about your underlying principles of your system and the fit that they have with your organisation's strategies and values. Senior level support and buy-in for any change is really needed, and also kind of in a realistic way. So a recognition that some turnover may be inevitable when you make a change like this, but that there is a broader strategic commitment to making these kinds of changes. You need an underlying HR system and approach that works, so that's transparent and consistent, and built on benchmarking and job evaluation. This came through very strongly, that we need to be really kind of almost scientific in our approach to developing these underlying systems. We need to build in a process for testing the local market. So by this, it's about looking at the skills that are available locally. Potentially, people talked about doing this on a role-by-role basis rather than trying to assess a whole country's skill market at any particular time, but just when an opening comes up, assessing, okay, could we recruit someone locally for this role, or does it still need to be someone in an international contract? And then finally, just building in a transition phase where an old system is slowly phased out rather than a sudden change. So this might be offering pay protection for 18 months or something like this, and then slowly reducing allowances offered across that kind of period of time. Okay, so the final point I really want to cover is this idea of strategic considerations that came through very strongly, actually, was why organisations want to make change and how they make the change. So these topics really all came out as the key issues that organisations need to consider before the restructuring starts. And the first is nationalisation strategy. This is obviously linked to the localisation agenda more broadly, but it's the idea of prioritising recruiting and developing local staff wherever possible, rather than automatically recruiting international staff. And that was mentioned by 12 of the 13 organisations that we spoke to, so that was really strong. Even those who are still retaining a dual salary system can implement a nationalisation strategy. The second key strategic consideration was around this mobility philosophy. So it's making decisions about whether you want to have everybody in your country offices local, or if you want to come up with a kind of a global cadre of workers who move around, building capacity, retaining organizational culture, helping to connect more as an organization with headquarters. These are strategic decisions. There's no right or wrong necessarily. It's just what's right for your organization. So a couple of quotes there. We want to give more emphasis on internationals being a global workforce. They should be globally mobile, they have a certain level of expertise and experience, and should have a high focus on building capacity of nationals while they're there, so that they could potentially be replaced by nationals when they leave. So this is different to having kind of expatriates coming in. This is a very mobile group of individuals who are moving from office to office to office, and they could be any nationality. And then the second quote there is, well, we strive to hire local staff. It's not always possible, so when we can't do that, we will move people from one country to another, but that's treated as a relocation rather than a temporary expatriate assignment. So this organisation is saying we're really relocating people, we're recruiting them and relocating them from abroad to be permanently in this new office, in their new office. It's a different strategic approach. The total rewards package came through as something that was really important as well. So I guess when we're thinking about reward, we obviously need to be expanding it beyond just pay and benefits to look at those other aspects that would be important to individuals who want to work for our organisation. So looking at your total rewards package is important. What do you offer in terms of why individuals want to work for you? What is your philosophy as an organisation? The cause of the organisation itself. How is your brand? Some of the really big organisations with really great brands, you should use those brands in order to attract people to their organisation. The kind of working environment and development opportunities that you offer as an organisation, these are all the things that people take into consideration, as well as pay and benefits whenever accepting a role. And this came through 13 organisations, so everybody talked about this. We find people are working for us because the contribution to society is really important. Compensation has been a key element for us in order to be able to attract and keep staff. But of course, there are other things that we also hear from our staff, that they really want to work with us more because of the reputation the organisation has in the humanitarian sector. So people might be willing to take a slightly reduced pay if the reputation is good and if they want to be contributing to society. And finally, the final 2 points here is firstly, is identifying who your market comparison groups are. So this is really whether or not you want to be competitive. I guess it's who you want to be competitive with. So are you trying to compete with the private sector? If you're looking for highly skilled technical staff, you may need to be competing with the private sector, which may mean that you need to be paying more for those roles. So it's looking at who your comparison groups are. Are your employees comparing themselves with others locally, or are they comparing themselves with others internationally? And there's a couple of different example quotes here. One for whom the local market is the comparison group. So that's the first one. We don't ever compare salaries from one country to another because I feel it's not a relevant comparison. So for this organisation, it doesn't matter what anybody in a different country office is earning because it's only about that local context. And then the other approach is taking that more kind of internationally mobile, this global cadre of workers. So saying that if somebody comes and breaks the e-wall, then they'll get the same pay whether they're based in London, Johannesburg, or Nairobi. And the reason we've done that is that for those roles we need the international experience, and they have an international remit. And so we fill that regardless of the nationality in the home country, and also regardless of cost of living or local pay scales in that country. So that group of workers, they earn the same regardless of where they are around the world, which is quite a different approach to the first organisation. And then the final point there is just around your centralised or decentralised HR and reward decisions. So how much do you want to make these decisions at headquarters and then feed them out to your country offices? And how much do you want to give your country offices autonomy for the way that they are rewarding their employees? Again, that's an important strategic consideration that you as an organisation need to make. Now, a key issue which was repeatedly raised in the interviews is this need for a sector-wide approach to addressing the topic. And so we're hoping that by writing this report and having these webinars and the workshop, we can help to get people talking about what's going on and how to make changes. And people, we're talking about the need for INGOs to do something together. So if one INGO does something really bold, implements something really new, which will save them money, but will reduce their competitive, it's not going to do anyone any favors. So we need to move together on it. So trying to make the change more or less at the same time. So it's not about wage fixing or anything like that. It's about saying our philosophy as a sector is that we should be localizing, we should be reducing expatriate wages, if that's expatriate salaries and benefits, so that we can be building capacity locally. So the key messages of the presentation and the research itself are that there's really no one best way to structure reward. It depends on those strategic components which I've talked about. So the nationalisation strategy, your mobility policy and your total reward package, those three things are really crucial to think about before you start making your changes. And this idea of the incremental approach, so not just overnight expecting to make a change, but rolling it out slowly, going through the steps of change, and keeping your employees in the loop at all times as well and getting them on board. And the final point is really around working together. So the strength in numbers point there is it's both that we need to work together as a sector to make these changes, but also that we need to collect data and share data so that we can make evidence-based decisions. And I think that's where universities can help, because we can talk to organisations and we can gather some of this information potentially confidentially or anonymously, and then we can help to share what's going on and to build a broader evidence base that you can then use. I just wanted to briefly mention the project resources. So we have this website, which hopefully you've seen, and on the website you can freely download the project report and then also the 6 organisational case studies. And at this point, I wanted to actually invite Laila Badawi, who is here from the Norwegian Refugee Council, who very kindly provided one of the case studies. And she's willing to speak to us just for a few minutes about the approach that the NRC are taking to changing their reward. And I just thought it might help to give kind of a flavour of the work itself. So I'd like to pass over to Laila now. I'm not quite sure. Hopefully Lauren is doing that. Hey there, Laila. Oh, hi.
Can you hear me?
Yes, wonderful.
Good. Thank you, Ishbel. And thanks for being invited to say a few words. I will not take long. So my name is Laila and I work with NRC, the Norwegian Refugee Council. And as you mentioned, we have been part of this project in terms of being one of the organizations presented with a case study. I think this is a very important project and we're very happy to be part of it. Over the last 3 years, NRC has had a big global reward project going on. We're still working on it to the end of this year at least, but we'll probably continue with new things next year. So we have done a lot of big changes with regards to our approach to reward globally. But I also have to recognize that we still have a way to go in regards to fair pay. We are one of the organizations that are categorized with a dual pay system. But just to highlight some of the main changes that we have gone through, we have developed and implemented a consistent system across the organization, using now job evaluation across all categories of workers, all categories of employment contracts, regardless of national or international. So we have a global grading structure where all positions are included, currently working also on the headquarters jobs. We are using pay market benchmarking data more systematically than we have done in the past. And we have developed some global principles for pay structure design. So recognizing that we have a dual system, so we have pay structures for staff on national terms and conditions and those on international. We have certain rules and principles that apply for all structures that are developed in the organization. I think those are the the main changes that we have done across the organization in terms of having a more consistent and unified approach to reward in NRC. We have, as Ishbel mentioned, made these changes gradually. We have made quite a lot of changes to the international compensation benefits packages, where we have also reduced the number of allowances. And we did implement these changes from the beginning of this year, 2017, where we have a transition period, where we have staff who would be better off on the new system and staff who would be worse off, and where we have a transition period of 18 months. So a pay protection period for those who are not benefiting from the new total compensation package for international. We are also working with other, colleagues in HR in terms of recruitment, nationalization, mobility. What does it mean? Trying to define. We have some mobility. We have a mobility policy, a nationalization policy on paper, but we're still working on how to implement it throughout the organization. So I would say that that's maybe where we are at now, how we can move forward from some of the more global overall principles and systems that we have developed towards implementing changes so that we always try to attract skilled and qualified nationals where possible, and how we can use our internationals more as a global workforce to move around and fill gaps when needed and build local capacity when there is skills shortage. So we have faced a lot of challenges on our way, but also been able to make changes. Mainly, I would say one important aspect has been to have senior management buy-in and helping not HR taking the lead on this, but working very closely with the senior management. And although communication is always challenging and it's never enough and sufficient, we have at least tried to regularly communicate about the changes and why we're doing them and what the changes are. So I don't think I would spend more time and say more.
Oh, that's great. Thank you very much, Laila. I think it really helps to just to bring it to life a little bit, to hear from someone who's actually doing this work. And I think that the NRC is a really great example of that incremental approach. It's that first box in the flowchart that I showed you, coming up with this underlying, consistent, transparent system. It's still a dual system, but it is fairer in many ways because it's now there is a system in place that people can understand, even if they may not like it, they understand it, and that is really important, I think. So I just wanted to mention briefly, just looking ahead, what our plans are, and so we want to keep working with NGOs to make changes to policies and systems, and particularly to undertake evaluation of the impact on HR metrics and on organizational effectiveness, on employees themselves. I also want to look at employee expectations and needs around rewards. So this comes back a little bit to that living wage question that I raised at the beginning, but just also looking at what is motivating people to get into these roles, and how much are they expecting to be rewarded. And then looking at, when we change our systems, what impact does that have on things like extra role behaviours, people going above and beyond in their job. How does it impact their engagement at work, their retention at work, and things like that. There are a lot of motivation theories that we can draw on that talk about the negative effect that extrinsically rewarding someone, or giving someone money to do a task can have. So I want to explore that a little bit more within the context of the international NGO sector. And I'm also just really open to other ideas that you might have about how we can help you. As I said, we're really interested in building partnerships with organisations to try and help to change things and help to move things forward in a way that's useful for you. So please do get in touch if you have any thoughts or ideas or questions, and my email address is there on the screen. So that's the end of the presentation for today. I'm not sure if Sam has another couple of words to say or not.
And no, just to say very many thanks to you, Ishbel, for presenting and taking time to prepare the slides and to go through that with us, and to Layla as well. I just wondered if anyone online had any immediate questions. You've got the option to email us as well, but if you had anything you wanted to ask about the presentation or the research, then please go ahead. No? There's a lot to think about there.
Yeah, maybe a question for me. Hi, Mario Bindrim, Save the Children International. I was interested, as you try to bridge the gap between internationals and nationals for certain positions, how would you then approach the gap between the top salary band in country and the lower band, so the gap between drivers and senior management team, for example?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you're kind of talking about pay dispersion there, so the gap between the highest paid and the lowest paid in your organisation.
Exactly.
Yeah, and what came through in this research is, yeah, we're still seeing that at the higher levels, some global pay data is being used. So it's maybe less than for a full international role or full international salary, but that it is still having to be boosted up a little bit by some global data. So we are still seeing that at the higher levels, people are still earning significantly more than at the lower levels. And I think that that's probably just something else that will change with time, as we as a sector get closer to a point where we're not recruiting people at on such high packages. I think as it becomes a norm to have a smaller package, I think that we'll see changes going on there.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Does anyone else have any comments or questions before we finish?
Hello.
Hi.
Can you hear me? Hi, this is Krista Lenahy, International Medical Corps. This is very much an operational issue, but for people who have changed, has there been an issue as far as attrition is concerned in the obviously in the international sector?
Yeah, good question. So a couple of different organisations who have changed talked about that. One or two said yes, they've lost. There's been the inevitable loss of some people on the really high packages as they make changes, as they kind of transition into a new package, which is much less. Some people have been dissatisfied and they have shifted to other organisations. But in general, in terms of recruitment, the organisations were saying they hadn't noticed any, they're tracking it, but they haven't found any significant issue yet with recruiting. So that's something that's being tracked and it's ongoing, and I think that's a really important thing to share as well, because obviously that's a key concern for organisations. So I think, it's twofold. It's making the strategic decision of we want to have these systems in place, these fairer systems, and as a result of that, we are likely to lose some of our international employees. But we're committed to the strategic approach that we're taking. And then the second approach, I guess, or the second strand is around recruitment and saying, but we'll still be able to recruit quality people into those roles. Through this project, there was no evidence that there was not the ability to recruit people into those roles. But that's something we'll be following up on.
Okay, thank you.
Great, thank you both. Okay, I think one more question, if anyone's got any further questions, comments, and then we'll end. I noticed Faye just asked if we were going to share the recording, which we will do after the webinar. We've been recording, so we will share the link for the recording and for the report again. Any more questions? No? Okay. Well, once again, I would just like to thank Ishbel for running the webinar for us. We are looking at introducing more webinars to the CHS Alliance, so if you have any feedback for us, please get in touch with Lauren and myself. If you have any ideas for further topics as well, just let us know, because this is a whole new area for us. We do have a LinkedIn group on Reward. The LinkedIn groups are not going that well in terms of discussion, but if you do think that a network to discuss these issues further would be useful, then please also let us know, and then we'll look at the type of chat facilities that we're using and maybe move that away from LinkedIn and do something else. So please, any of your ideas, let us know, and we'll consider them. But thank you very much for attending. I hope you found it interesting, and we'll look forward to hearing from you if you have any questions, or if you have any updates, or if you need any help on issues within your organisation. Take care.